And welcome to the Sunday Night Special. In the studio with me this evening is a name that will be very familiar and a voice that will be even more familiar to Melbourne listeners. Ex-ABC man, Graham Evans.
Hello, Alex. It's very nice to be here.
There's that familiar voice. I don't know how many times I heard that on ABC radio. Graham, you were a local lad, I understand. You were telling me before we came on air that you grew up in Caulfield.
Yes, not far from these studios, as a matter of fact, Alex, in Fitzgibbon Crescent, which is adjacent to Eskdale Road, which for some reason seems to be the better known of the two. I'm sure a lot of people know where it is.
I'm sure they do. Had you always wanted to be in radio? Or?
Yes. Oh, yes. I was one of the people who knew always what he wanted to do when he left school. And even before I left school, I was going into studios like 3KZ, 3AW, 3XY, and doing kids program or appearing on kids programs, and loving every minute of it. Plus, constructing a studio of my own in the backyard and broadcasting to the family, driving them mad, you know.
I think we all did that. I did the same thing.
I know.
And I haunted 3DB and places like that.
Yeah.
But I always had a love of music and radio. And I guess that's why I'm here now as we speak.
It's in the blood.
It is in the blood. It gets in the blood. And once it's there, you can't get rid of it.
You can't.
Now, Graham, what school did you attend?
I went to Melbourne Grammar most of my life, and then I left in 1946, was it? Or yes, 1946, and went to 3AW. Yes.
Now it starts.
Yes. And I started out at 3AW as office boy, because that's the way you sort of could get into the business in those days. You didn't sort of just say, I want to be an announcer and go on air.
Right.
You had to climb the ladder. So I was an office boy for a while, doing the mail and blicking stamps and that sort of thing. And then I gradually went up into the record library, became a turntable operator, and got on air as the next step, and stayed on air after that.
Who was your manager at 3AW in those days?
When I first went there, it was, I'm trying to think who it was. There were so many managers while I was there. Randall White was the first one, yes.
Right.
And then later Miles Wright.
He was a good radio man.
Yes, well, of course, he became director of the Broadcasting Control Board, or its equivalent, I think, later on. And no, they were great people to work under. Jim Osborne was another one who was manager at some stage too. Those are three I can remember.
Can you remember some of the people who were on air, personalities in those days?
Oh, yes, you never forget them. I'm in touch with some of them still.
Oh, really?
Judy Willing, and now Judy I still see occasionally, and a wonderful person. I also see people who are not on air that I worked with too, who were either in the record library or secretaries or something like that. Yeah. But of course, I've kept in touch with a lot of the people that were there, like Bob Horsfall was there in my time at AW2.
Good man.
Yes, and we have get-togethers, of course, occasionally.
Yes.
We're called the Survivors.
That's right. I was aware of that. That's how I made contact with you.
It was,
because I used to listen to 3AW quite a lot. Bruce Mackay. Was an on-air personality there in the 60s, and I used to listen to Bruce's request program, which he had called Number Please, because he took over, I think, from John Bright, if memory serves me.
Yes, that would be right.
Because John came from KZ to AW with Number Please, and he was a great entertainer on a...
Oh, John was a character. I can tell you some stories about John.
Now, so you graduated, you came record library, and you finally got on air?
Finally got on air, got a job on air.
And what sort of a shift did you have first up?
Look, I can't even remember. I was just a general announcer, you know. I didn't have any special programs that I can think of at that time. The names don't come to mind anyway, but then my memory is not as good as it used to be. And it was a long time ago. But no, this is in the 50s, and... for several years, I was doing just standard evening shifts and so on, because 3AW in those days was hooked up to 3CV Central Victoria, 3CV Maryborough.
Oh, yes.
As 3DB used to be hooked up to 3LK at Lubeck.
That's right.
And so they kind of had an evening, or 3DBs I think was all the time, but 3AW started from 6:30 onwards until
Right.
it closed down, because they did close down.
Yes.
In those days, about midnight or so.
Yes, they did.
National anthem and everything.
That's right. And two radio stations at least had closed down songs, didn't they? There was KZ and
Oh,
UZ,
yes.
you know,
Yes, they did.
Good
That's
night
right.
songs.
Yes, yes. Good night, everyone.
Yeah.
You've earned your daily bread.
That's it.
Yeah.
I actually use that to close my program tonight.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that's the piece I
Good.
use. That's the closer.
Good.
But but radio was different in those days. I mean, it was a family, wasn't it?
It was a family at 3AW. You never felt that you were looking over your shoulder for somebody to take your job. I mean, this wasn't that feeling that there is now. People are being stabbed in the back, right, left and centre by colleagues, it seems to me, these days,
Yeah.
who are anxious to get on air and at somebody else's expense. But in those days, you didn't live or die immediately by what the ratings were. They had ratings, and they were of interest, I suppose, well, I'm sure, to sponsors and management, but they didn't axe you straight away if your ratings weren't good. They thought, oh, you know, it'll change, it'll come up again. And it was a different atmosphere altogether. 3AW in those days was like a family.
Yeah.
It was just like a family.
Yeah. I remember 3DB was a family station. It was always known as a family station. And, you know, in the 70s, they just lost their way completely, and hence they're no more. It was a terrible shame.
Great pity.
You know, a great pity. Why don't we have a break for some music?
That's a good idea.
Now, you've chosen a track here from Carol Gibbons and the Savoy Hotel Orpheans.
Yes, well, Carol Gibbons was an American, actually, who came over to England, I don't know, in the late 20s, early 30s, I'm not sure, and became very popular in London and just stayed and became, you know, part of the English scene.
Yes, he did, and made a lot of recordings.
Made a lot of recordings, yes.
This one comes from about 1938, I think, Graham. So let's have a listen to it. Can you remember the title we're going to play?
Well, I can't remember which one I chose now. I Believe in Miracles.
No, I Double Dare You.
I Double Dare You.
So let's try Carol Gibbons and the Savoy Hotel Orpheans, I Double Dare You. lovely stuff from the very talented pianist Carol Gibbons.
Easy listening.
It is easy listening, and a very nice selection on your behalf. Now let's get back to 3AW, and something happened with you and Ceylon, Graham, and I'm fascinated by this.
Yes, well, Ceylon is Sri Lanka these days, of course, but I was approached in 1952 by the management of 3AW, in fact, not just me, but all of us there, to see if we were interested in taking up an exchange position under the Colombo plan for one of us to go to Ceylon, to Colombo, to train staff at Radio Ceylon, while they sent somebody over to Macquarie, which was then 3AW network, to learn the business here. And there would be an exchange for a year.
Yep.
And to cut the story short, this was circulated throughout the network, and the manager of Radio Ceylon, who was a Sydney person, Cliff Dodd, came down and did interviews, or went all around the country and did interviews, and the upshot of it was that I was accepted and went over for a year on a very good salary, I might add, more than I'd ever earned before.
For 1952.
Yes,
Yeah.
and had a year over there, or just a bit more than a year actually.
Good experience?
A very good experience, very interesting experience, the one who'd never been out of the country before too.
Mm-hmm.
And a whole new way of life, and lived in Colombo and enjoyed it thoroughly once I got used to the heat.
Right. Yes, I imagine that'd take a bit of getting used to.
Well, the studios were air-conditioned, but the offices weren't, you know, and where I lived just had fans. It didn't have any
Yes.
indoor air conditioning,
Yes.
but you get used to those
Yes.
things after a while.
So you had a year there. Did you come back to 3AW?
Yes, I did. I came straight back to 3AW, walked into, virtually my old job again, and just continued where I left off. And then I got itchy feet, as one does after some travel,
Yes.
and decided that I had to do the big, round the world tour.
Right.
And in those days, getting dollars to go through America was very hard, just after the war,
Yeah.
and there were big dollar debts to be repaid and so on. So I think the maximum you could get for any trip to America in those days, didn't matter how long or short it was I think $600.
Yeah.
And you had to make that last for the whole time. So I went right across America from San Francisco to New York by Greyhound bus over a period of 6 weeks,
Yeah.
and at the cost of $600 American dollars. And had a great time doing that, you know. I just stopped and looked and listened and all the rest of it. And then I went on to London by ship from New York over to Southampton, and was going to stay in London or maybe 6 months and trip around Europe and so on, and then come home.
Yeah.
But I landed a job with the BBC, and that was, it wasn't an announcing job, because in those days, you know, if you didn't have the right accent, you didn't get the job.
Yes.
Well, I was a partial announcer. They let you do sort of closing the station down announcements and odd little things you were allowed to do,
Right.
with an accent.
Yes.
And I also did work for the Voice of America there too, just routine announcements, because the BBC were providing Voice of America with facilities for their shortwave transmissions.
Right.
And so on. So there were interesting times at the BBC.
Sounds
as well.
wonderful.
Yeah.
So
That was a year.
That was a year there. And did we come back to Melbourne?
Yes, I landed back in Melbourne just before the Olympic Games in 56.
56.
And I thought it was going to be an exciting place to be, and wanted to see what Melbourne would be like, with crowds from all over the world, which hadn't happened in my lifetime before.
Exactly.
And it was an interesting experience too. And then I was back at 3AW again after that.
More farewells than Melbourne.
That's right, yeah.
So you then, of course, we know you, probably most of our listeners would know you from ABC Radio. You obviously got the urge to make a move in your career.
Yes, that happened in 1967.
Right.
A friend of mine had gone round to the ABC, and without any broadcasting experience at all, And I sort of asked him how it was going and so forth and so on. He was telling me, oh, it sounds interesting, you know, for a change. And by this stage, management at AW had changed, and I frankly was not happy with the way, the direction the station was going program-wise.
Yeah.
So I thought, well, if you don't like it, go somewhere else. And I went round one lunch hour to the ABC and had an audition, was accepted on the spot, and they said, when can you start? So I had to then go back and, tell AW I was resigning. But anyway, that happened, and I was very happy to spend the rest of my working life at the ABC from 1967 onwards.
And did you get an on-air position straight away?
Yes. I went in as an announcer.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the way Sentimental Journey started, which was a program I became involved with later on, it wasn't actually when I first went on air. It was my program, and it was called Saturday Night at Home with Graham Evans.
That's right.
And I was really just filling in for somebody who was on holidays, and she'd gone away for a month or something, and I agreed to fill in. And I don't know why you don't normally change formats of programs, when you're doing them for other people, filling in. But I just threw in a couple of my old 78s one night. At that time there was no interest, as far as I could tell, in nostalgia at all, but I just did it purely because I thought, well, I'd just like to play this old Ray Noble or something. Well, the phones ran hot. And to cut the story short, the person I was filling in for didn't go back on the program again. They left me on it, which I felt a bit bad about, but she said, no, I didn't like it anyway. She didn't enjoy doing it very much anyway.
Right.
So she didn't seem to resent it, which I was pleased about. And then I could sort of play around with the format a bit, and I started playing a lot of nostalgic stuff, which, really hadn't begun then. It was just from then on that the nostalgia became the big thing. So I was bringing in scratchy old 78s and playing them, and people were loving it. And the ratings went. It was the top rating program within about 6 months. It was top rating program in Melbourne on Saturday nights, and it was only in Melbourne. It wasn't a national program, which Sentimental Journey was, but this wasn't. And
how long did that last, Graham?
I think it was about 3 years or 4 years before Sydney saw the ratings and thought, what's the formula here for this high rating? They hadn't got it in Sydney at that time, and whatever they were doing. And so they took an air check of the program I was doing, and then said, look, we're going to do something along these lines, but we'll give you 15 minutes in it. It was, I don't know, how, a 2-hour program was it? I don't know. Anyway, they said, we'd like you to do 15 minutes of it. So I thought, well, it's better than nothing.
So they'd intended to network it.
Well, they did network it, yes.
Right,
It became Sentimental Journey, but it was based on my formula.
I remember well.
But I only got a sort of a small look in, you could say.
Yeah, that's
after
right.
That. So success sort of didn't really mean that my part of it was going to continue to the same extent as it had before.
Because I had an involvement, can't think of the producer's name now, a chappie, very nice man. But I used to record some of my 78s onto reel-to-reel tape, and I'd do a thumbnail sketch of each item and post it up to them, and they would broadcast it every couple of months.
Yes.
They'd have a new one. Rob Sharp.
Oh, Rob Sharp.
Rob Sharp.
Yes.
Yeah, Rob Sharp. And he was a delightful man to deal with.
Oh, yes.
And a couple of trips to Sydney, and I went and went down to William Street and made sure I went and saw him. But he was a very, very nice man. And, John West, who was the presenter.
Yes. Well, Tony Baldwin actually I think Tony Baldwin was before John West.
I think he was too, yeah.
I think Tony was the one designated to start it. And, of course, they had researchers and all sorts of things. I was a one-man show myself, but they used to have people researching it. And
Val Napthine in the archives getting out stuff. But, no, Tony I've spoken spoken to Tony and I bought some stuff off Tony. He was away overseas for quite a while. He's back in Australia now.
Is he?
Because he put out that wonderful
LP.
double CD of, was it Bakelite Box or something it's called?
Oh, yes, I'm going back to LPs. You see, that's
Yes,
how I live in the past.
but he did put out LPs.
yes.
But he has, since he came back to Australia, he's put out that double CD called Out of the Bakelite Box or something.
Mm-hmm.
But terrific. So you were reduced to 15 minutes.
Yes, I was reduced 15 minutes, and that was, let me see, something happened. There was, no, wait a moment, I'm wrong. It was an hour once a month.
Right.
At first, that's right. They gave me an hour once a month in the program.
Right.
And later on it became a quarter of an hour once a week.
Right. So it virtually balanced out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, listen, why don't we have another piece of music?
That'd be a good idea.
And we're going to have Arthur Tracy.
Yes, the street singer.
Yes. And When I Grow Too Old to Dream. Let's listen.
When I grow too old to dream, I'll have you to remember. When I grow too old to dream, your love will live in my heart. So kiss me, my sweet, and so let us part. And when I grow too old to dream, that kiss will live in my heart. We have been gay, going our way. Life has been beautiful, we have been young. After you're gone, life will go on, like an old song we have sung. When I grow too old to dream, I'll have you to remember. When I grow too old to dream, your love will live in my heart. So kiss me, my sweet, and so let us part. And when I grow too old to dream, that kiss will live in my heart. And when I grow too old to dream, that kiss will live in my heart.
The great sound of Arthur Tracy, the street singer. Great
Yes.
old tune, wasn't it, Graham?
Great tune, that.
Yeah, it'll live forever. Now, we're at the ABC, we're doing Sentimental Journey. Did there come a time when you weren't on that program anymore?
Oh, yes. And of course, in those days, television and television rosters for announcers and radio rosters for announcers were done all on the one sheet, they were the same person.
Yeah.
And then I opened up into television, of course, which I didn't expect to do, because when I did my audition, it was a radio audition.
Right.
And one day the roster came out. This is about 6 weeks or so after I'd been first at the ABC.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw I was down on this roster to go down and read the regional television news, you see, and I'd never been in front of a camera in my life and had no ambition to be in front of a camera.
Yeah.
And so I went to the person who did the roster. I said, look, I think you made a mistake. You rostered me down for television. And he said, well, that's all right. You've done television. I said, no, I haven't. I said, I've never said I'd done television. He said, oh, I thought you'd done television. Oh, look, just go down and do it. You'll be all right. Oh. So I thought, well, what have I got to lose? I'm not even going to be nervous about it. And it was pre-recorded anyway. They were little 5-minute country news spots. The country transmitters of ABC television used to drop off at 5 to 7 just to do a regional news which was produced out of Melbourne. There was a Gippsland news and a regional news, two of them. So they had all their tape recorders going at the one time. So anyway, I did this, and I couldn't believe it. I went down to the floor manager and I said, look, I've never been on television before. He said, don't worry, leave it to me, you'll be right. And he was very good. And I didn't even have time to think about getting nervous, and I did, and I thought, well, that'll be my one and only appearance. And of course, after that, I just kept doing it. So I can honestly say I was probably the only television newsreader who never had an audition.
Really?
To be a television newsreader,
Isn't
because
that
I was never auditioned for.
So you just found yourself on a roster and you think,
Yeah.
oh, golly, what's going on?
And I thought I'll go down and do it once for a laugh, and that'll be it.
And you found yourself a
And I
permanent
was,
fixture.
well, then I started doing the weekend, main newses,
Yes.
Not Monday to Friday, but the weekends. And I did that for 15 odd years or something.
Gee.
And I'd fill in Monday to Friday as well when there was somebody would go away.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's fascinating. And were you still involved with radio at that stage, or had you made the transition?
No, I
completely?
was still doing Sentimental Journey.
Right.
So I was spending half my time between Rip and Lee and Broadcast House,
Right.
which I liked.
Yeah,
There was a variety. A lot of other people were in either one or the other.
Yeah.
And, that was an interesting situation as far as I was concerned. It added variety to the work I was doing.
And Graham, when did you retire? When did?
Well, officially in 1985, I thought it's time. I was 55 years old then, and I thought it was time to get out now.
Yeah.
And so I did. But then, of course, they started asking me could I do casual work because somebody was sick or on leave or something. So I started going back doing casual work on radio. This is just on radio, not television. Although I must admit they once asked me to do the weather when Edwin Marr didn't appear for some reason. And this was years after I'd stopped doing weather and news on television. Yeah. And I said, look, sorry, but I don't think after this amount of time of not doing the weather, which is highly specialised, it's a routine you've just got to keep doing to be good at.
Yes.
And I hadn't done it for so long, I thought, no, I don't think I'll go and make a fool of myself. But Edwin appeared. He made it in time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a great story. It really is a great story.
Oh, well, it's just.
Do you miss it? Do you miss radio?
Well, in some ways I do, in some ways I don't. No, I'm very happy to sort of just remember those happy days. I wouldn't like to be in the business now because of the the very, very nature of it. It's not. I don't think it's as friendly as it was.
Yeah.
Worker friendly, I mean.
Community radio. I mean, our station here is a family, and that's how we sell it.
Well, that's good, and that's the way it should be. That's really great. But another reason musically it doesn't interest me now is that I'm of the old school. I mean, to me, music is melody, and so much of what I hear these days has no melody whatsoever.
Well, I don't think you'd be Robinson Crusoe.
No, I'm not. I know I'm not, but I still resent the fact that somewhere in the 50s, this started to happen, in the mid-50s, melody was a thing that you didn't even need to think about. Just words, mumble the words and put the rhythm in.
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the way it's gone. Time is getting away from us, Graham. I want to thank you very much indeed for making your time available.
Alex, it's been a pleasure. I've
And,
really enjoyed meeting you.
We're going to go out. Thank you. We're going to go out with another one of your favourites, which is an Al Bowley track, and I happen to adore Al Bowley. I've got many of his recordings. And what have you chosen for us to say goodbye?
Well, this was a terrific hit for Bing Crosby, wasn't it?
It was.
I think he made it the hit it was. Learn to Croon, and an old DeCoslow and Johnson composition, and it's a great one. But this is Al Bowley, who was a terrific guitarist, by the way, as you know probably, and recorded in 1933, and I think with his pianist Monia Litter, I think, is on this as well.
Well, my special studio guest has been Graham Evans, and I thank you once more on behalf of all of the listeners.
Thank you, Alex.
In days of old, when knights were bold, fair ladies were enraptured by stirring deeds of chivalry and daring. But nowadays, in other ways, sweet maids are won and captured. You'll hear the best authorities declaring, learn to cruise if you want to win your heart's desire. Sweet melodies of love inspire romance. Just murmur ba 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 bee, and when you do, she'll answer ba 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 bee, and nestle closer to you. Learn to croon, you'll eliminate each rival soon. If you're heading for a sunny honeymoon, learn to croon. La da dee da da dee, la dee da dee dee da da dee, da dee da dee. La dee 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 dee, la da da dee da dee. Learn to croon, you'll eliminate each rival soon. If you're heading for a sunny honeymoon, learn to croon. If you're heading for a sunny honeymoon, learn to croon.